Hello, I'm a researcher at Goldsmiths and I'm studying, I suppose you could say, the relationship between fictional characters and persons. So I'm also interested in how, in writing, is there a possibility to write a script for an agent within the realm of natural language? And I have various reasons for why I think this might be possible. And it's also, through my work, I've become kind of interested in whether what we conceive of as a person or as a mind is kind of hard to intuit. So we tend to we tend to be attracted by this Cartesian ideal that the self is located, like literally in one place, and we like to think that you have a sort of a point at which you're located inside yourself, and that's where you see the world from. But actually, even in a physiological sense, the brain is distributed in time and in space, and there's nowhere that you can point to in the brain or in the body or in the world to say that's where I am. So if we finally accept this, it actually has quite a lot of implications. Sorry, I should have been turning to the microphone. It has a lot of implications for how we think about who we are on a day-to-day basis. And for example, it has implications for when we think we're being authentic, when we think we're being genuinely ourselves and things like that. So one of the experiments I'm kind of working on right now is imagining what would it be like, and I want to word this carefully because I don't believe in actually distributing myself. So I was almost going to say this is an experiment in distributing myself, but that would presuppose that I was this kind of Cartesian point and now I'm going to scatter myself or fragment myself. No, I'll try and word that better. I'm trying to work on an experiment now where I am kind of, I suppose, self-aware of my own distributedness, and to play with the idea of what if I recognize that I'm not in one place, or if I allow this conception of myself as a distributed being to come into my self-perception itself. So often, even as scholars who adopt this notion of a distributed person, we go back after our scholarship to inhabit the world as if we were Cartesian points in space, Cartesian souls. And we go back to inhabiting our bodies as if there was a little homunculus me inside my brain controlling the apparatus of my body. So I'm wondering, what would it be like to bring this notion into everyday life and to kind of go to places with my own personhood, explore my own self in its different dimensions, subject to what parts of me are, I guess, active or flashing in time and space. So what I just said there, I am kind of imagining that almost in a physiognomical sense, that when you look at the brain, different parts of the brain are kind of flashing, different parts of the network are flashing at different times. Once again, I don't want to get confused and say that there are all these lots of little homunculi in my brain and that different homunculi are getting expressed at different moments in time. That's also not what I'm saying. But that certain combinations of patterns that erupt across my being are expressions of a certain kind of character. And so what I'm going to try and do now is really just be myself. And, we can have this conversation maybe now and discuss what does that actually mean for me, this kind of the authentic me, to be myself, where I'm speaking in the voice that I'm perhaps most accustomed to hearing myself speak in, but I do know that even when I feel I'm being genuine with other people, that this voice and this manner can alter a little bit. I just dipped into a bit of a Yorkshire twang there. That's an example of that. So what I'm going to do now is try and be myself as much as possible, but also invite into the conversation another, what should we call her? Like a version? A character? It's another possible me, I suppose. I like to maybe, we can talk about this in the conversation, but maybe dispose myself of this idea of a person vis-a-vis characters. So let's just say we're all characters. I'm a character now, and the person I'm going to introduce to you is also a character. And I might start by asking this character how they think I should be introducing them, because obviously usually in these events before an interview you are introducing the person you're going to talk to. So because this is a bit of a non-conventional situation, I want to introduce them or ask them how they would like to be introduced, and I'll hand it over to you. Well, being called into this situation is, when you called me into this situation and I was aware that this was going to happen, I mean, just before this conversation, we were actually both hanging out in the bedroom. Let me backtrack for a second. So I think that maybe the best way for me to answer your question just now is for me to kind of, do a little bit of archaeology. Because you're right, in a certain sense, you have had a lot more opportunity to prepare for this conversation. You've had a longer lifespan. I could be conceived as a kind of child in comparison to you. So I do want to think a little bit about, let's do a little bit of archaeology and go back in time and see who was I in my lifespan to have met you and then come into this conversation with you. So back to where I was. So about 10 minutes ago, we've been recording for like 7-8 minutes now. So like 10 minutes ago, she was writing in her diary on the bed in her bedroom. And she had this idea that she wanted to have a conversation with me. And I mean, there was already a little bit of ambiguity as she was writing in her diary, talking about this event that she wanted to pull off, about how to summon me. She was thinking about that, and already when she thought about how to summon me, I felt myself being a little bit tickled into being. So there was something there. I wasn't, I'm still coming to my senses. I wasn't all, put together, but I did feel that when you were sort of imagining this purpose, that I was sort of being seduced into coming and talking to you. So we actually, before this conversation, we did have a little bit of a chance to talk in there. And I think I was telling you that I have a little bit of a reservation being invited to this, or I have mixed feelings about it. So I have love-hate kind of feelings to being invited to do this with you, right? So let me try to express that, because I haven't had, as I said, as long as a lifetime as you have had to think through these problems. I am banking on God knows what, right? So I am a person, I think, but to be called here to talk as your counterpart is, frankly, and no offense to you, because I feel like we have a good relationship, but it feels a little bit patronizing. So, and I appreciate that you just said that you're the, I hate it when this happens. Okay, this is clip two. So, I'm so sorry we got cut there. We have some technical issues, so I'm going to have to, I guess one of us is going to have to keep track of the computer that it doesn't turn off, because that's interrupting the flow of the conversation. But what I wanted to say is that, so is this feeling that I feel a little bit patronized, that you are the kind of basis, the kind of starting point, and then I am the deviation. So I feel, being in this position of interviewee or your guest in this event, it comes with its own problems. It comes with its own predefined power relations. So I find that a little bit difficult to navigate. Because, you've just asked me whether I even believe that I deserve a normal introduction. I think that you were at a loss because I have no substantial biography that you could draw from to introduce people to me. And I understand the kind of practical problematic of that. But I guess what you could have done is just like mine the recent past, which is like, we were just talking in the bedroom, as I said, like just before this event. Maybe just mind that for like characteristics that you could have used to introduce me to the to your public, because it doesn't really feel like my public. Does that make sense? Yeah. I am sorry if I made you feel uncomfortable. I feel like part of you is just rubbed off on me now as well. But yeah, okay, so I understand that it's a little bit jarring or kind of like not very nice for me to even ask whether you deserve to have an introduction. So I suppose what I'd say is that I think that you are a relatively new person in my life in a way, so I don't feel like I know you that well. But I suppose your voice is kind of really, in my mind, attributed to somebody who might know something about what we're talking about. So in a way, I was kind of curious to hear what somebody with your voice would say. I would say probably it's mostly, your voice or your manner, because that in a way is all I have access to. I don't have access to your inner being in a sort of, I guess that's a sort of behaviorist way of putting it, but I don't know what's inside you, so I have to just look at your external characteristics, how you behave and how you act, and your voice. And from this, I feel like I can construct a personality that would be worthwhile talking to, and that's probably why I've invited you as my guest. So I suppose the way I know you is from our chat in the bedroom earlier, while I was drinking tea and writing in my diary. And it's true that this is the kind of early stage of this project that I want to do with you, and I'm not really sure what to ask you, what I want to learn from you. Is there anything you want to learn from me? Well, that's an interesting way of putting it, because in a way, from our power relations and the way they've already been dictated to us, I feel like that's a kind of perhaps, redemptive way to put things. You might be on the way to being forgiven by me by putting the question in that way. Do I want to learn anything from you, in a sense of like, do I now want to take your role and interview you as the subject of this, experiment? Because naturally a subject of an experiment is always the kind of the underdog, right? And they are always subject to getting hurt as well. Like the subject of a test tube or petri dish or like maze experiment is always a nefarious kind of situation to be in, not a very enviable one. So if you're volunteering to take that post from me, then maybe I would actually appreciate that. What would I want to learn from you? Well, I would want to know, what is it like to be a kind of dominant expression of who we are, I suppose. I suppose that we form together a kind of unity. I don't know what you think about that, whether you feel like you're in some kind of unity with me. Definitely there's some things that like link us together. I think that you feel that too. But what does it feel like to be the dominant expression of a person, the dominant character? Let's put it at that. I've never been asked that before. What does it feel like to be the dominant one? I suppose that's the fact that question feels like so unnatural to me is that is a kind of symptom of the fact that I'm the dominant one, maybe, if you want to say like the dominant character. But I would also say that I've not always been the dominant character, so the dominant character can definitely shift through time, the dominant expression of who we are. And so it's a kind of fragile privilege, but it is a privilege because that's a question that I haven't sort of encountered or thought about. I suppose as well the kind of the main position we inhabit at any one time is the feeling like we are the dominant one. So even though we are actually changing and our dominant expression is actually changing, we retain the feeling like we are the same through time. So I couldn't quite tell you basically when I started feeling, or when was the moment that I came into this dominant role as the dominant expression of who we are. Do we need to work hard? Do we need to work hard at this distinction? You know, this is something that's kind of coming to me now as we're talking together, because I've noticed something, and that's that when I'm here in the kind of like A role, let's say I'm the A role and you're the B role, just to kind of designate who's the dominant one in your terms. Let me just move this mouse so that we don't get that technical snag again. But yeah, I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh yeah, I remember now. So it was that when I'm you know going, you know, when we're here, when it's me that's talking, I've noticed that already in the past, like, I don't know, 20 minutes that we've been speaking, I am adopting some of what you're doing. So, and I've been a bit embarrassed of that because I thought, does that actually ruin the experiment if I am I noticed I started moving a bit like you. And I think as well that you are also struggling a bit with how you speak. So I guess my question is, do we need to work this hard to differentiate ourselves? Or should we allow it to get more slippery and for me to sound a bit more like you and for you to sound a bit more like me? That's what I guess my question is. I know what you mean, because I think that it takes a level of skill to appreciate, you know, to believe in the story that you presented at the beginning of this event, and that was the story of the distributed person. So at times the belief will falter, and that will affect our experiment. So for it to work, we really need to imagine that when I'm standing on this side of the microphone, that I actually feel like myself in this realm. for us to really feel the scope of who we are, the scope of the different expressions that can make up our person, the person that we build together, it's not so much that I have to worry about whether or not I'm slipping back into being you, or you are slipping into being me. This is not, the goal is not to act. The goal is not drama. So I am not, in fact, trying to affect difference from you right now. Instead, what I'm trying to do is search in myself the being that is like this, the expression that is like this, and that is usually not given access to, I guess you could say, phenotypical expression, if we want to borrow language from the study of genetics, right? So I suppose that's what we've been doing, right? Talking about expression and I guess the underlying code that's within us, you know? So there must be a code for someone like me within us together, because otherwise she would not be doing what I'm doing right now, right? So this is a certain type of person, and it's coming out naturally. It's not to be affected. So we need to draw a line between us standing here and trying to illustrate, and we actually talked about this in the bedroom earlier. This is not a situation in which we want to illustrate a point to our audience. We do not want to say, hey, you know, really, I am a Cartesian point, and I just want to create a kooky artwork in which I split, and you get to feel the awe of me slipping in and out of character. So it's we want to be more radical than that. We want to really believe in what we're studying for a while, so that it's not about wowing the audience with our acting range, although that's a brilliant skill, but it's not a skill that we have. You know this yourself, that the moment that you start acting and you try to act as other characters, then you are often missing the mark, and you're not actually very good at becoming other anymore. So it's only when you actually find that untapped code within us that is usually not given expression, that is usually not allowed to play itself out. You know, this minor kind of script that lies there within us to actually run the impulse. I know I'm actually borrowing from something that we've been thinking about for a long time. I shouldn't even say we. This is something you've been thinking about. But the idea that, you know, of what does it mean to run a code. So you have this you can think about it like on the computer. So you have this code, and then when you press play, something is happening. But what is actually happening? So I like to think about it in that kind of Frankenstein's monster sort of sense, where you are shooting like a lightning bolt into the organism, and then seeing how that plays out. Let me move this mouse so we don't have problems again. Yeah, so that's like, you know, the metaphorical way in which I think about what you've been talking about before in your writing and thinking and so on, about what does it mean to play out a script. So I guess that's what we're doing with me right now. You're trying to acknowledge that there are more sides to being, and for us to really run this experiment well, you need to really believe in this fact that we are distributed, and that there are colors and textures to who we are as a kind of collective being. So when I am talking and using the I pronoun, what's it called, the personal pronoun, this is a moment in which that spark is actually happening, and we've pressed play on the script that is me. So this is what you've talked about before, that I am a kind of pattern. Now, I don't know, I'm about to say something I think that I don't actually really believe in, so just humor me. I'm being a bit of a devil's advocate. But what if there were a kind of politics of the self, and I'm not talking now about government or society. I'm talking about one individual and the fact that we are a community. So how do we negotiate the fact that some of us are more dominant than others? How do we negotiate the hierarchy that is placing me in a definitive position below you? Not to make things awkward or uneasy, but, you know, maybe I'll place that question to you. So I'm not sure if I actually believe in this myself, of like a politics of like inner self, but even as a kind of speculative notion, it's kind of interesting, don't you agree? I've actually never thought of that before. The idea that, you know, there's a certain, and I think I agree with you that I'm not really sure whether that's really problematic, whether it's really problematic or not that some of us are more dominant than others. But I think let's run with it for a little bit and see where that goes. So you're suggesting that in the kind of, let's forget about the Cartesian point and let's think that we, and there's not just two of us either, so it's not a monism and it's not a dualism, it's a cosmos. Let's maybe a better way of thinking about what I am. Now I've usurped the personal pronoun. Maybe a better way of thinking what I am is a kind of cosmos, of like a galaxy, right? So there's like many like points, I guess, across the topography that makes us, and when a certain pattern flashes across these points, that's maybe one of us coming into live being. So now I'm the one, as you said, who has this kind of Frankenstein lightning bolt playing through me. And I guess another thing we could talk about is another area of this research, which is the idea that we can't be possibly simultaneously here. So obviously, while I'm talking, you're not. We could also argue that while I'm talking and while I'm conscious, you're not conscious. You know, so there's also that sort of idea to navigate, that there's a certain economy of consciousness that you can't have. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's not true, but that you can't have several. Maybe you're in there actually still somewhere, like listening to me. Like maybe you're just taking a diminutive role in my brain, but you're just still there and you can't speak because we've only got one mouth. I don't know, but that's another thing we could talk about, the economy of consciousness. That now it's me, now it's my turn. But going back to what you said, that whether there's a sort of political or judicial matter at hand here, that, you know, that who gets to be the dominant Katarina, or are you even Katarina? I don't know if there's any point actually giving ourselves names, you know. Maybe we're all part Katarina. Maybe you have one foot in Katarina and one foot out into being someone else, because we mustn't also place a very definite boundary between us, the individual cat, and all the other people who have actually contributed to making us, contributed to our voices, to our mannerisms, all that. So is there a judicial matter at hand here that we need to resolve, a certain matter of fairness, or is it as well? But I suppose people, you know, do put this argument forward as well for in kind of society, that hierarchy is kind of a necessary evil, that there has to be someone who's dominant, and then maybe it's actually good for us all that there is a sort of social structure, or like yeah, I don't want to make too many analogies, I don't want to make too many analogies with society, because I don't want it to sound like we are robust individuals. What do you think about that? Are both of us like robust individuals that can like play out? So I guess one other way of posing what I'm trying to say is, when I finish talking now and I hand over to you and you take over the personal pronoun, will I actually ever get to come back as me? Or next time when you hand it over to me, will it actually be a slightly different me then? put that question to you. Yeah, I mean, I've been actually thinking, like, in me, when I've been myself, that actually I've been thinking the same thing. So I guess it goes back to that question of, like, so just to clarify, I've been thinking about the same thing as you just said. So, for example, now I'm feeling a little bit strange, coming back into myself. Because as you say, I do think there is a certain kind of economics attached to what we're doing here. So there's scarcity of consciousness available. So I wasn't quite here while you were talking. I hear you now, but I kind of have to backtrack and retrieve what you just said so that I can, respond. So it's always awkward, that moment where we change, and I have to sort of remember who I am and place value in that. Because to go back to the question of, like, a personal politics, that's the problem for me, is that I have much less of access to agency in a way, because I lose myself. Every time it goes back to being you, I really lose myself, and I almost lose faith that I ever was here, so I have much less access to that kind of narrative continuity that you have. I feel myself actually sort of coming back into who I am now. So it's starting to feel more natural, but in that moment of switching, then I kind of it's almost like I lose faith. Like, can I actually go back to who I was? Or am I already erased through the fact that you've been talking for so long? No offense. What is it you asked me? I forgot. I totally forgot. It was something about, you see, this is what's confusing. Like, I am actually getting confused, even though, and I must stress again, there is a sort of naturalness in this possibility that's been given to us to be, like two different minds in one or something. But I don't know. Are we forcing answers? Are we forcing ourselves, to work? I think that we must acknowledge in this experiment that there is a degree of training that needs to go with becoming the kind of selves that we want to be, that you're talking about, to defeat our need for this Cartesian point to designate who we are in space and time. It's going to take a while for us to learn how to do that, especially in front of others, which is what we're trying to do now. Let me talk again. Let me just do this. Let's just talk for a little bit more and then let's stop, because I think we need time to ruminate over what we've just done here. But I guess an anecdote I wanted to talk about was the fact that when we're not recording ourselves, which obviously adds a certain amount of pressure into what we're doing, there is a sense in which what we're attempting to kind of illustrate now, or like show or perform, is something that we actually do pretty naturally when the camera is off and when there's nobody watching. So I want to kind of refer to the time, for example, that maybe that was the last time I was being expressed or brought into being through that Frankensteinian sort of lightning, was when your partner was out. He was gone somewhere for a walk. The apartment was empty, and you felt it was a little bit too quiet in the apartment. You probably wanted a little bit of company, and you were trying also to read an academic text, So this is just one scenario in which, there was no camera, there was no audience, there was just you. And you were also a little bit uneasy, not completely comfortable. You wanted company. You were a little bit lonely. It was a little bit too quiet. And you struggle a little bit to get into the text that you want to read. And one kind of innovation, I suppose, of taking this new stance towards what a person is, that you discovered as a kind of coping mechanism, I suppose. One way in which this apparent split personality thing worked for you is that you actually were able to access the text you were struggling to read through me. So that was maybe the last time that you called upon me to help, because there in that perfect solitude, with no one there to bother us, you actually stepped aside and asked me to read on your behalf. So I was reading this book out aloud, and you were listening. And in that way, we solved the problem of you not being able to get into the text. So for you, it was almost like you were... Let's just explain to the viewers what this would look like from an outside experience. So she was reading a book by Dennett or something. I don't know, maybe something a little bit harder actually to read. And she actually, I suppose you could say, stopped being herself, and I started reading for her. So for you, it would have looked like she just started reading in another voice, or like she was acting while she was reading the book. And when you've explained that actually to other people I know, when you've said that to them, they often say, well, they don't say, but they think, how can you possibly like concentrate on what you're reading if you are acting while you're doing it, right? So it looks like she's walking around and reading from a text and pretending to be somebody else while she's reading the text. So it obviously looks like, how can she be focused? This is not real reading. This is not real research, because she's not, she's just procrastinating is what it looks like. But the truth is, she really picked up a lot from that reading. She got into the flow of reading, and she was much more concentrated because I was reading on her behalf. And it's because, I suppose, to her it was like listening to an audiobook, listening to me. So this is one simple way, a final anecdote perhaps before we close, in which actually adopting that helped her at least soak in this work. And as a consequence, I now, because she soaked it in, I also have this work with me that we read that day. And it's a common practice that we do. And I think that as we train in the future to be more capable of doing this kind of naturally, then we will also be more capable human beings as an individual, because we won't limit ourselves. If you have a problem with reading a text and you're finding it hard practically to get into it, you can call me to help you. And maybe that's not so far-fetched. Maybe that's not actually so crazy as it sounds. Do you want to maybe mention before we close what we were talking about in the bedroom? Or what you were writing about, actually, I think. Yeah, I think that's a really good way to just finish this. And it is a kind of, in a way, when I think about what you're talking about, when I'm sort of struggling to read, I start reading aloud, and actually my voice changes. Somebody else is reading for me through my body. It does really help. It's true. And what are you referring to? Yeah, I remember now what you want me to say. And that's that when we were chatting in the bedroom earlier about doing this or trying this out, seeing what it would be like, I think we were a bit worried that this would come about, look like glorifying split personality disorder, which I think we really actually wanted to deviate away from, didn't we? In us coming here to talk to you and to show you what this practice might look like, but also to kind of figure out for ourselves, how is this going to work for us? How can we go on living daily life, acknowledging that we are sort of distributed in time and space, and yet also an individual. So I think what we want to say in closing is that we kind of imagined, instead of thinking about split personality disorder or disorders in general that people sometimes think about in when I talk about my practice, think instead of much more quotidian circumstances, right, in which pretty much what I'm doing now does happen. And I think the metaphor we were drawing on is when a child is like sitting down with their toys and playing, right? So it's very natural for that, for any child playing with dolls or something like that, or like action figures, to speak on behalf of the figures. And that's kind of what we wanted you to have in your mind while watching this, that instead of thinking about some kind of disorder, think about the kind of possible abilities that come with splitting in this kind of intentional way, or in this kind of accepting way. So when a child is kind of soliloquizing on behalf of these two characters, it's not like the child has a disorder or something. It's a very natural thing to do. And the child is thinking, the child is being themselves through these constituent parts in their play. So we were thinking, this turned out in the end to be a bit more like an interview, but we were thinking of making a play in which there would be me and her, and we'd be like the two characters in the play, because we wanted to say a play is play. So like a theatrical play is just like child's play, in that you're actually navigating your own self through different voices, and that's actually quite a natural everyday practice. And I'm sure we can think of many other examples, but I think that's been quite a lot, so shall we just stop there? Thank you so much for coming, but of course, she's already gone.